Hey there, it is Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Radcliffe.
Hey, we're really pumped about talking with this guy, New York Times best-selling author and speaker, Lee Stroebel. Lee, how are you?
I'm doing great, Rick and Dan. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Lee. Now, over 40 books. Which one's your favorite? Or are they all your children?
They're like your children. Yeah. I can't pick a favorite, although always the latest one is the one that you're most focused on. And The Case for Heaven, of course, is getting most of my attention these days.
The youngest child. That's always the one
right.
That's the best, right?
Do you ever get surprised, and I'm assuming that you get to fly now since we're kind of post-pandemic and you're out speaking and stuff. Do you ever get surprised people come up and say, Lee, I read your second book and it just changed The Case for Christ, it just changed my world. Do you ever get surprised anymore?
I tell you, there's nothing better for me than hearing stories of people who came to faith through The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, or any of my other books. It's just the best. I'm an evangelist at heart. I want to see people meet Jesus now and for eternity. And so I never get tired of those stories. And there have been some funny ones along the way, and some amazing ones as well.
Yeah. Well, I have to share just one. I work with young guys, and there was a young man a few years ago who was in my Sunday school class and just kind of faded out and went the route of, I'm an atheist now and this, that, and the other. And he eventually wound up in the hospital and was sick with just some stuff. And I brought him Case for Christ. I'd stayed with him just to keep working on him, but I brought him the Case for Christ because he was very, in his head about scientific and all this. I said, just read this.
Yeah.
And he had it for a year or so and finally got around to reading it. And sure enough, now he's a Christian. He's a youth pastor, and and giving people that book. He said it was that book that changed his life. So
that's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, somebody just sent me an article from a newspaper up in Wisconsin about a guy who was a Satanist, and he was serving his second term in prison. Came back to his cell one day, and The Case for Christ was sitting on the floor. He has no idea where it came from. Read it, not only became a Christian, but then on his release became an ordained minister, is now a pastor up in Wisconsin. I mean, only God could do something like that.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Love talking with Lee Stroebel. Love what he's done. He's got something fresh out. We're going to talk about it. It's the Case for Heaven movie, which is coming out in April, and it's at a theater near you. We're going to give you where to go to, where you can put your zip code in, and you could get, it's all over Metro Atlanta, so you can't miss this movie. The Case for Heaven. Lee, wow, this is your second movie from your book. How's it feel?
Well, it's exciting. There's a lot of people that won't sit down and read a 300-page book, but they'll go to a 90-minute motion picture, and that's fine. Yeah. I get that. People learn in different ways. So we wanted to be able to connect with as many people as we could on this important topic of what happens after we die. So I'm thrilled with this film. It's a documentary, but it's beautiful film, filmed all over America. The cinematography is breathtaking. And I think it makes a compelling case that when we close our eyes for the last time in this world, that's not the end of our existence.
Tell us about, give us a little sneak preview, if you will. Tell us about some of the interviews in the film, the folks that you talked to and what you heard.
Yeah, we interviewed John Burke, who studied 1,000 near-death experiences and concluded that when you look at what actually occurs in a near-death experience, it's consistent with Christian theology. We look at a case, Howard Storm, who died and had a hellish experience and how that transformed his life. But my favorite interview is with Luis Palau, the famous evangelist. I had the last interview with him before he died, and he knew he was going to die. In fact, after I interviewed him and I tape recorded it, we were going to come back to do the video, but he died in the interim. And so in the film, you hear his voice, but we don't have him on camera. But he said something profound. He said, Lee, when you get to the end of your life and all is said and done, you'll never regret being courageous for Christ.
Wow.
And I thought that's a powerful sentiment for every follower of Jesus.
Yeah, definitely.
New York Times bestselling author Lee Stroebel with us and speaker, and the movie's coming out in April 4, 5, and 6. The Case for Heaven. We want to give you details on how you can see it. Do you think us going through the last couple of years it kind of has intensified the question? Hey, this is serious stuff here. I can watch it on television and people get back up, but in real life, they don't get back up.
You know, you're absolutely right. 29% of Americans know someone who's died during the pandemic. My own brother died during the beginning of the pandemic. And my wife and I were having lunch at a restaurant, and the waitress started to cry. And we said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I almost didn't come into work today. We just lost a family member to COVID." And I thought, here's a young woman, about 18 years old, probably never thought about death before. Why should she? She's got her whole life ahead of her.
Right.
But now death has come knocking on her family's door, and you could see the anxiety and apprehension in her eyes. So, yeah, I think this time in God's timing, you know, this is a moment where people really want to know what evidence is there that we continue to live after we close our eyes for the last time in this world.
Talking to Lee Stroebel, The Case for Heaven, and is coming out April 5th, 4th, 5th, and 6th in theaters. So there's the book, but then there's also the movie as well. Anything in the book that's not in the movie that you're like, folks, you got to read the book too. You know, don't just watch the movie.
You know, it's a different experience.
Yeah.
You know, I hope the book, and we've got great feedback on the book. I think it really impacts people both intellectually and emotionally. But at the same time, I think a film is a whole different experience.
Right.
I hope people do both. I hope they read the book first,
Right.
Kind of get a framework, and then go to the film, or either way.
Yeah.
But it's such an important topic that I think we all ought to have a curiosity about it. And you know what? The good news is we do have reliable information about what the afterlife is about.
Lee Stroebel with us. We're talking about the Case for Heaven movie. You can go to thecaseforheavenmovie.com, put in your zip code there, and you can find the theater near you. As I mentioned, Decatur, Cobb, Chamblee, Marietta, Fayetteville, everywhere. That's just a few. But don't miss this movie and take somebody with you. Lee, when you watch the preview with a group of people, how do you prep yourself for reaction? No doubt people reacted in the place, in the room, in the theater. How do you prep yourself, and how did they react?
We had incredibly strong reaction, including among people who are spiritual seekers, people who are just spiritually confused, people who are not followers of Christ. Had a very positive reaction because we have both viewpoints in the movie. You'll hear an interview with a guy who says, "I've deconstructed my Christian faith. I'm no longer a follower of Jesus. I don't know what happens when we die." And he talks about his reasons for believing that. But I think the case itself, the evidence itself, both inside and outside Scripture, I think is clear and compelling. It's powerful. It's persuasive. And I think anybody watching the film, regardless of where they're at in their spiritual journey, will emerge with hope.
And real quick, I got to ask, because there's a little thing in the notes about the movie that there you had your own brush with death and how that kind of impacted you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I almost died. My wife found me unconscious, called an ambulance. I remember waking up in the emergency room, and the doctor looked down at me and said, "You're one step away from a coma, 2 steps away from dying."
Wow.
And then I went unconscious again. I had an unusual medical condition called hyponatremia, which is a severe drop in your blood sodium level. And fortunately, they saved my life. But for a while, I hovered there between life and death. And I found that to be oddly a very clarifying experience because nothing is more important at that moment than whether or not we live on after this life. And it really compelled me to do the research, write the book, and then create the movie.
Wow.
Lee Stroebel, we're talking about The Case for Heaven. Go to thecaseforheavenmovie.com. And as I mentioned, it's coming out in April 4, 5, and 6. Perfect timing, right before Easter celebration, Passover, and so that folks can see that and take your friends. We know that this is a fresh work for you. It's getting ready to be released. What are you working on now, Lee? Can you tell us, or do you want to get back with us?
Well, you know, my next big initiative is called the Lee Stroebel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics at Colorado Christian University. I gathered 40 PhDs in evangelism and apologetics. We created 91 fully accredited, all online courses on the undergraduate level, the master's degree level, and the certificate level for people that don't want a degree, but they'd like to learn in these areas. And so we launched that. And we've got our first students getting ready to graduate with their master's degrees. We have our first certificate students who are getting their certificates after they take half a dozen courses in a certain category, for instance, cultural apologetics or innovative evangelism or whatever. So that's kind of my legacy project, to equip and train the next generation in how to share their faith and how to defend it in a natural and effective way.
Lee Stroebel, New York Times best-selling author, talking about the movie, The Case for Heaven movie, and you can get details, thecaseforheavenmovie.com. Lee, thank you so much for what you've done over the years. It was 20 some years ago. I didn't know who Lee Stroebel was, and I went to a Willow Creek breakout session, and you were giving your testimony, and there was probably, I don't know, there's a little small room, seemed like there were 1,000 people in the room. And I was like, who is this guy? You had me on the edge of my seat with your skepticism and your being an atheist and then your conversion. I said, my gracious, what a story. But thank you for being faithful and continuing on. And I'm so glad you're still with us. And
thank you.
Not time for you to go yet.
Yes.
I'm glad to be here too. And that's a great story. You know, I only God can do what he's done in my life. You know, I can look back at the transformation he's wrought in my life and say, there's no way I could have brought this about. So it's been an adventure.
Well, he's used you in amazing ways, Lee. Be encouraged.
We'd love to talk to you in the summer or the fall. If you have, we'll just kind of backtrack and say, hey, how'd it go? And how can people see it again? Check it out, thecaseforheavenmovie.com, to find the place near you. As I mentioned, Buckhead, Decatur, Cobb, Chamblee, Marietta, Fayetteville, no doubt one near you. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.